Do you ever think back on your old projects and wonder if you've really improved very much over time? Well, today I'm going to answer that question for myself as I roast some of my oldest projects. Hello, welcome to Show and Tell Meg. I'm Megan and I like to make things, and I have been knitting and crocheting for about 12 years now, and as such I have created a lot of different projects. I have been on Ravelry since the beginning and I have documented everything that I have made. I saw this idea from Nitty Natty and how she roasted her oldest projects that were on Ravelry, and I thought it was kind of a fun trip down memory lane, and I knew that I had some of my pieces still that were the first things that I made. So I pulled them out and we are going to go through them and check out what I think of them now, and do I think that I could do it better? Okay, so we will start with my first ever official knitting project. I learned how to knit through a Craftsy class called Knit Lab, which was taught by Stephanie Jappel. And it was one of those things where they had a sale and I just really wanted to learn how to knit. And this seemed like the one that was promising me how to do that. And it did. And the first project that she has you work on in the class is this frilly headband scarf thing. And I made this out of Caron Simply Soft because I had it. I remember Walmart had a big clearance on all their yarn because I think they were closing down the yarn and fabric section. And so I grabbed all these different colors of Simply Soft, not knowing that I wouldn't really care for it later. But I had this color, which is tangerine, and it took 1/4 of a skein. This took me from June 30th, 2012 until July 5th of 2012. So I was quite devoted. And you make it in 2 pieces and you seam it. So you learn how to stitch garter, and then you do this keyhole, and it's feather and fan at the ends. So you make the 2 pieces and you seam them together. And this was designed to be, where's my hole? So this was designed to be worn like this. You could wear it as a scarf, or you could try to wear it as a headband. I think my head's a little bit big, but it is still kind of cute. It's just wanting to squeeze off of my head. But let's see, what did I have to say about it? It was very easy and fun. It was much easier to learn with this class. This was in the glory days of Craftsy. Craftsy was my absolute go-to to learn how to do any of the crafts that I know how to do now. They were my favorite. I loved the format. I found learning through their videos incredibly easy. And when I look at this now, I mean, there are definitely some mistakes, and there's areas where I got a hole there. My edges are a bit, they're a bit wavy. They're not totally even, but honestly, I didn't do too bad of a job considering that this is my very first thing. And I liked this because it wasn't a washcloth or a regular scarf. I didn't want to knit, or for days, weeks, months on end. I wanted something small that was still easy to learn on, and that I would learn other things just other than just a knit stitch. And so this did a really great job, and I keep it basically for nostalgia. I don't think I've ever worn this, mostly because of the color. I mean, it's fine. It's a fun color, but it's not very cold here. We don't need things like this super often, and so this is a bold choice. And so yeah, I don't really wear it, but I keep it around because it was my first ever knitting project. The next things I have here are some of my first ever amigurumi. This is my first amigurumi project I ever made. I learned this also from a Craftsy class, which was taught by Stacy Trock of Fresh Stitches. I still love her patterns. I absolutely recommend her if you're trying to learn how to crochet cute animals. But I learned how to crochet the stitches from a good friend of mine, and then I started this class. So this is the Jay the Bird pattern from the Craftsy class. called Amigurumi Woodland Creatures. And I also made it out of Caron Simply Soft. And it took me from August 12th through August 23rd, 2012. So definitely took me a little time. There was a lot of start and go and make some and pull it out. I have a lot of notes on here and said that the end was most cumbersome, but he's still really cute. I mean, if you look at him close, he's got some very inconsistent stitches. You can see his stuffing. He's very soft. I now know to stuff things a whole lot more firmly than I did then. His eyes are actually not, you have to, if you look at him like this, his eyes are straight, but his eyes are on two different rows. So I have learned so much since making this guy, but he's still adorable. Like, look at him. Isn't he so cute? I mean, I'm still really proud of him. And so he doesn't sit on a shelf or anything, but he is still around in my sewing room. And yeah, I'm proud of making him because he's the one that started it all. And by the end of that class, I learned how to make a reindeer. And again, he has some, you can see his stuffing. This is also made out of Simply Soft, which I now know was a terrible idea for amigurumi. I hate working with that yarn, but I had so much of it. So I'm glad that I learned how to use what I had, but I didn't know any better. And his, where his head is attached is a bit janky, but overall, I definitely improved from the bird to the reindeer here. See, like a lot more consistency in the stitches. He's definitely still very floppy, but I didn't know any better. But if you compare that to now, comparing the consistency of the stitches to now, I've certainly improved. And so that's nice to see an actual representation. This is one I'm working on right now. So I literally just crocheted this, but overall, I mean, he's not bad. He's looking pretty good. So I'm still pretty proud of him. He used to play music. He used to play Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He has one of those music buttons inside, but sadly the battery has died and he's completely sealed up. So I can't get to it, but the sentiment is there. Okay, let's see what's next. A lot of the things that I made in the early days were gifts. So I do not have them anymore. So let's move on to something that was supposed to be one of my next projects after learning how to knit through that class. And I did most of it, but I had a snag. This is the Hope Shawlette, also by Stephanie Jappel. This was from back in the days when Craftsy used to sell kits. They had commissioned this pattern with Stephanie Jappel, and they had commissioned this special yarn by Lorna's Laces, and it was all to benefit breast cancer. It was like an October thing, and I liked the pattern. I thought, I can branch out. I could learn how to do a shawl. And so in November of 2012, I started knitting this, and I got the entire stockinette section done, which is pretty commendable. And when I look at it, it's pretty good, like nice and even. I see a couple of mistakes here where I have a couple of extra holes that don't go there. But honestly, you would never see that, which is pretty cool. The snag came when I got to the lace. I had not done any kind of charted lace pattern before, and I kept having these mistakes. It just wasn't lining up. And it turned out that there was errors in the pattern. So as a new knitter, I had no idea how to assess that. And thankfully, someone on Ravelry had put a corrected version, and I eventually found it. So I completed this a year later in 2013. But it took me that long. I remember I was so mad. I had splurged on the fancy kit with the fancy yarn, I can't actually even remember how much I paid for it. Let's see. I paid $20 whole for this kit, which came with the skein of yarn and the pattern. But to me at the time, that was just crazy. And so I was so mad that I couldn't finish it, but it is cute. Thinking back though, I don't wear a lot of this bubblegummy kind of pink. And I think it was more that I was trying to join in with something, you know, with my teacher. I had just learned how to knit from her, and I liked the design. I liked the exclusivity of the yarn color and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I do still have it. And this yarn is lovely. Like Lorna's Laces Soulmate, I believe it is. Yes, it's Soulmate. It's fantastic feeling, but I never wear this. But it stays in the same box, in this box in the top of the back closet with my Feather and Fan scarf, because they are from the very beginning and I'm still very proud of them. Okay, we're going to move on to another unfortunate pattern that I could not handle at the time. These are my very first socks. I started these with a Craftsy class. These were in the Knit Sock Workshop by Donna Dracunis, and I thought, yeah, I have a class. I want to make socks. These are pretty. I'll jump in with this one. I had never made a sock before, and I decided to make a lace knee-high sock. I'm not a big proponent in doing something super simplified just because you're a beginner. Like, I do believe that you should pick something that you actually enjoy and will use. However, I definitely don't recommend making a knee-high lace sock as your first socks. I made some good progress on it, but I kept getting frustrated with the lace again. This one I started in 2014. I started it in December 14th of 2014. I didn't finish them until February 27th of 2015. I also ran into a snag because I didn't have enough yarn. I bought 2 skeins of this, which is my favorite yarn. At the time, I didn't know that. This was Knit Pick Stroll in the, was it Blue Topaz colorway? Yeah, which they don't make anymore. And it's a lovely teal, really nice yarn. But the thing with knee-high socks is it takes more. Like 2 skeins of Stroll is plenty to make regular socks, but knee-high socks, it just wasn't. And so I actually didn't get them all the way to the knee. They kind of go like mid-calf. But I had to, the confusing part was adding this like gusset where your calf gets bigger. So this was sort of an ill-fated project from the beginning. I did push through and finally finish them. But again, I never wear these. I mean, how often does one need mid-calf length lacy socks? You know, I think that sometimes our early projects, it's not so much that our techniques are bad, but we haven't learned how to choose what we will truly use and enjoy sometimes. At least that's the case with me. All of these first projects, I mean, other than the amigurumi, which, I mean, do they really have that much of a purpose anyway? All of these projects, they were probably not destined to be used very frequently, even when I planned them, but I very much enjoyed making them. So these definitely have some mistakes in the lace, but as you can see, they're still lacy, and I don't think that anybody but me, unless I stare really hard, is going to notice any of the mistakes that I did make. So if you are one who wants to make socks and you want to do a lace pattern, I mean, go for it. I would recommend doing a vanilla sock first, but I still got it done. So I had been knitting for a little over 2 years at this point, and I did get there in the end, but it's just not something that I necessarily recommend. At the same time, if you want to do something like this is what makes you excited, then go for it. Do the projects that you find interesting because it's what will keep you motivated to finish them. And this is definitely an example of that because I tried so hard. I wanted these socks, and maybe they don't get worn a lot now, but I really liked the design of them at the time, and so I was willing to put in the time and effort to make them the best that I could. Okay, next we have my first ever sweater. This was made with the Craftsy class, my first sweater, and it was a Lion Brand sponsored, hosted class. So this is a Lion Brand raglan pattern with a collar, just a very basic sweater. This was knitted in pieces and seamed. So this was my first time ever seaming anything, which is what made me so nervous about it and part of why I wanted to have the class. At the time, this was in 2013, the end of 2013. So I'd been knitting for about a year, and I loved the idea of making a sweater, but I just didn't know the ins and outs, and I wanted someone to kind of hold my hand through it, which is what was so great about the Craftsy classes. So this is made in Lion Brand Wool Ease in navy. So it's a wool acrylic blend. It is pretty oversized. I know I did it according to my measurements, but I didn't know much about ease and things like that. So this is a bit bigger than I would typically wear much here. I live in Florida. We just don't need heavy sweaters. So an Aran weight acrylic blend sweater just isn't something that I have to use all that often, but I do still have it and it still looks nice. I mean, it's a little pilly, you know, but it's 11 years old at this point, so let's cut it a break, you know. Still very functional. I did get fancy and added I picked up for patch pockets. I think that I did this with a tutorial from Susan B. Anderson, who was also a Craftsy teacher. Like, I was just very big into everything Craftsy. And yeah, I still have this and I still like it. If it was cold enough to wear it, then I would probably wear it occasionally. This is the kind of thing that I could like leave at work in case I was cold. And then I'd have a sweater on hand, but I wouldn't miss it too much if it's not at my house, if that makes sense. So yeah, this has stayed and it has stood the test of time. Even if I don't wear it all the time now, I'm still pretty proud of it. I think I did a really good job for this being my very first sweater. So this last project is a different kind of first. This was my first ever color work. And if you've ever done color work before and you know the difference between different types of color work, you might notice why this was an issue when I show it to you. This is an intarsia vest. This was designed by Andy Satterland. I was huge into Andy Satterland patterns, still am. I still knit her sweater designs. I love how they fit. I love the style. It's got that like vintage style librarian kind of look, which is totally what I like to wear. And back in 2015, she put out a collection with knit picks that was called Quiet Days. And it had a different sweater in it that I wanted to make as well, which I did also make. She did a knit along that fall for this vest. And since I was buying the collection, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll make this vest. I decided to use entirely stash materials to make it. So I took 3 different undyed wool yarns that I had in my stash. Or 2 of them were the same, but they were different dye lots, and it was obviously different colors. And then one of them was a different type of yarn, but they were all wool worsted weight. And then I used scraps from some of my other projects for the intarsia. So if you look, it has this striping. So this was me learning how to alternate skeins when you didn't have the same dye lots. And it ends up, I mean, it's more subtle in person, I will say, but you can still tell when you wear it. Like, see, at a distance, it's not as obviously striped, but I don't know. It's pretty obvious. So the body of it was 2 different dye lots of I Love This Wool from Hobby Lobby that I had gotten on clearance, and then 1 skein of Patton's worsted in the Aran color that I think I thrifted. And then the yellow and the pinks here are all Cascade 220 Superwash, and the green was Woolies by Lion Brand, just because that's what I had on hand and I didn't want to run out and buy an entire skein of yarn just for this floral design. But if you know anything about intarsia, it's a bit more difficult especially if you don't know what you're doing, and I didn't. I'd never done any color work whatsoever before. From the front, if you know anything about how this should look, you can tell it's not great. This is blocked and it's been sitting in a box for years at this point. So these stitches do not lay flat. I did not have consistent tension. There's also some stitches that are just flat out bigger than others. I tried so hard to make it so that these wouldn't be too tight. And I mean, there is some give in here, so I think I did a pretty decent job there, but therefore I ended up with some stitches that are huge. And this is super evident when we look on the inside. So Intarsia isn't supposed to look like this on the inside. I had no idea anything about, dominant colors or trapping floats. I had to do a lot of float trapping. That's what this was, because I was just so nervous that I was going to end up with floats that were too long and I was going to pick it when I put my clothes on, because that's what I kept hearing people say. And so I crisscrossed living daylights out of everything. And in the end, I couldn't even weave in the ends because you can't see where the stitches are because of how I crossed everything. And so all of these ends are just tied in knots together and then snipped, and I put fray check on them just to make sure that they wouldn't unravel. And then same thing with where I had to alternate a lot of skeins on the side if they were so short that I couldn't weave them in. I was just happy to be done at that point. And so the inside is craziness, but it is still wearable from the outside. Like, it's a cute vest. The only thing is it is quite short. This was also before I really knew anything about fitting things to my body. I have a long torso, and so I'll put a picture of what this looked like on me. I don't want to put it on right now because it's hot, but yeah, I mean, by today's standards, though, this is probably fashionably cropped. But at the time, I just felt silly wearing it because it was so short. So this got worn a few times, not very much. However, I'm proud that I tried. You know what I mean? Like, you have to start somewhere. And so this was a little bit of a disaster, but I did a lot of things. I stash busted. I alternated different dye lots. I used a new, to me, method of color work. And actually, I brought, just to show you, this is I still have never done all that much color work, but this is a recently finished color work. And I mean, grant you, this is stranded, but the intarsia should look like this or cleaner. So as you can see, much more even and consistent than this. So that is my little trip down memory lane with my knitting and crocheting. And I can honestly say from looking at these things that I have definitely improved. Just like that intarsia, the back of the intarsia versus the back of this stranded color work. I have just really devoted myself to this hobby. And I think anything that you are excited about doing and constantly learning and growing, like, the more you do something, the better you're going to get at it. So I am a faster knitter. I am a more consistent knitter. I know how to fit things to myself. I'm not as intimidated by new techniques and things like that. And I don't need the hand holding that I did in the beginning. So I definitely have come a long way since these days, but I am still proud of the items that I have here, even though they're not perfect. I think most people, if they don't knit, they're not even going to notice that there's anything up with them, frankly. So they're all still perfectly wearable, and I'm pretty proud of that. What do you think? Do you think that my knitting has gotten any better? Am I delusional to think that it has? Do you have anything that you could share? Do you have your old projects up on Ravelry? Maybe this is something that we could keep going and lots of people could show some of their early projects and just see what they think of them now, what they could change, how they've worked out for them over the years. Even though a lot of mine didn't necessarily become super practical, for the practice that they gave me, they were super practical, because the only way to improve is to do. Like, if you're afraid of having pieces that you can't really do much with, you will never end up with pieces at all. Like, you can't let the fear of not being perfect at something ruin your joy in making things to begin with, because you're never going to get closer to perfect unless you work on it. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you did, please do give me a like and subscribe if you want to stick around. I post all the time about knitting, sewing, crocheting, making things in general. I would love to have you here. Until next time, I hope that you're getting lots of practice at these hobbies.